Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.
Iowa's fiscal house has been battered by job losses and plummeting tax revenues. With that backdrop, first-term Governor Chet Culver enters an election year with a trio of Republican challengers vying for his job. Today, the three candidates seeking their party's nomination for governor debate the issues. From Cedar Rapids, this is the Republican race for Iowa's governor, the Iowa Broadcast News Association debate.
Welcome to Cedar Rapids, the site of the 2010 Iowa Broadcast News Association Convention. My name is Bob Fisher, the news director at KGLO Radio in Mason City, and I serve on the IBNA's board of directors. The IBNA is the group of radio and television news directors, reporters, and producers who work together to improve electronic media news to our stations and the public. We're happy today to continue a tradition of our convention by hosting the candidates who are running for the Republican nomination for governor. Let me take the opportunity to introduce those candidates to you now. Terry Branstad is a native of Leland in north central Iowa's Winnebago County. He served 4 terms as Iowa's governor from 1983 to 1999. After leaving office, Mr. Branstad later served as president of Des Moines University from 2003 until last October, when he decided to once again seek the highest office in state government. Bob Vanderplatz grew up in Sheldon in northwestern Iowa. He's a former high school teacher, basketball coach, and principal. He currently serves as the president of MVP Leadership Incorporated, which specializes in strategic vision and executive leadership for business and industry, economic development, education, healthcare, human services, and private foundations. Rod Roberts was raised in Zering in central Iowa. He has served the last 10 years in the Iowa House of Representatives. Since 1991, Mr. Roberts has served as the development director for Christian Churches, Churches of Christ in Iowa, where he has helped oversee the development of new congregations throughout the state and has assisted existing churches with strategic planning and leadership development. Candidates, we thank you for agreeing to join us here today at our convention. Now I'd like to introduce our panel of media members who will be asking the candidates questions today. Paul Yeager is the host of Iowa Public Television's The Iowa Journal program, which looks weekly at the issues and how they impact the state. Janine Beck is the State House reporter for Iowa Public Radio, and Todd Dorman is a columnist for the Gazette newspaper here in Cedar Rapids, and his 24-hour Dorman blog appears on the Gazette's website. Our debate will work like this. Members of our organization have pinpointed 6 specific subjects dealing with state government. Each member of our media panel will ask the candidates a question pertaining to these subjects, with each candidate being given 90 seconds to answer each question. At the end of our debate, each candidate will also be given another 90 seconds to make the closing remarks. Well, let's get our debate started today. And our first topic is the state budget. And Paul Yeager, you have the first question.
Mr. Roberts, if 10% across the board, is that a responsible way of governing? We saw 10% across the board for every state agency last year. If elected, how do you balance and then reduce the size of government?
I believe that an across-the-board cut, unless absolutely necessary, is not a responsible method of dealing with a budget shortfall. It's important that the governor work in conjunction with the legislature in making critical decisions about appropriating money. Would have been far better a year ago if Governor Culver had called the legislature back into session and together work on finding areas of the budget where perhaps spending could have been reduced, spending could have been eliminated, and then secure other areas where there would have been no impact in reducing spending. I think it's far more responsible to actually work in conjunction with the legislature and have a more surgical approach to finding specific areas where you can balance the needs of state government and the priorities that Iowans have. I think that working with the legislature, working in specific areas of the budget, we can find areas of savings. As a state representative, House Republicans in the last 2 years have actually developed a plan where we could save nearly $300 million in specific targeted tax cuts. As governor, I would work very closely with the legislature and use a more responsible approach to balancing the budget than simply using an across-the-board budget cut.
Mr. Vanderplatz.
Well, first of all, I think we need to take a look that we didn't need to be here. When Governor Culver became governor, he grew government by $1 billion. 2,500 new full-time employees. And as soon as we hit an economic glitch or an economic hiccup, it's like we went into this economic crisis, like somebody pulled the string of a proverbial knit sweater and everything began to unravel. A 10% across the board cut is not leadership. Matter of fact, it takes no intellectual firepower to do an across the board cut. I came out in June of '09 and I told Governor Culver, you have a $161 million problem on your hand. That was a time for him to call a special session, determine priorities, fund those priorities, but we shouldn't be cutting public safety across the board by 10%, or the Department of Corrections across the board by 10%. That was a time to fund priorities, but make other streamlined decisions. I think there's a lot of ways in state government we can provide better services, but under economic integrity. I think we need to be funding the classrooms, not the bureaucracy. It's a great way to streamline in education. In healthcare and human services, again, let's reduce the bureaucracy, but let's fund the front line. There's a lot of streamlined approaches that can be done, but it's going to take leadership, and to be quite honest, it's one of the reasons I'm running for governor.
Mr. Branstad.
Governor Culver's actions are both reckless and irresponsible. First of all, as has been said previously, he recklessly increased spending. Even in 2009, when the nation was already in a recession, they passed the biggest state budget in history, and then they got this federal stimulus money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and spent a lot of that on ongoing expenses instead of one-time expenses. And then on top of that, he insisted on putting the state deeply in debt by passing this big bonding plan that's mortgaging the future and it's going to cost the taxpayers interest over the next 20 years. And then, after the Republicans and the state auditor had warned about the reckless spending, he ignored it for 8 months in 2009, and finally in October, one day he woke up and realized we're in deep trouble. And instead of calling the legislature back, as would have been the responsible thing, he did this reckless across-the-board cut, which really put the burden back on local governments. Local school districts have had to raise property taxes and lay off teachers. It's not a responsible way to do things. We need to restore fiscal responsibility and have a prudent and thoughtful leader. I would have brought the legislature back. I would have set priorities and reduced some of the programs that are less important in order to protect education and higher priority programs.
Next question, Janine Beck.
During the campaign 4 years ago, Chet Culver pledged to reduce property taxes for Iowa businesses. But his administration, like others before, failed to adopt any meaningful property tax reform. Is there a way to reduce the burden on commercial property taxpayers without raising rates for residential homeowners? Mr. Vanderplatz.
Janine, there really is. It's a great question. It's a great observation. What's happened not only in the Culver administration, but in previous administration, is we've taken state obligations and we've put them onto the back of property taxpayers. In this case, Governor Culver, there's no way that he can fund the state budget that he passed. So property taxpayers are going to have to absorb a lot of that cost. Talk to your city councils. Talk to your county board of supervisors. Talk to your local school districts and ask them, are they going to have to raise property taxes because of Culver's leadership? And they'll tell you, yes. There is a way to reduce property taxes. As a matter of fact, I've been a leader on that front. I said I would take mental health and developmental disabilities off the back of property taxes for two reasons. Number one is we can serve people with disabilities better. Two is it realized $144 million savings, and we can target that property tax relief to commercial, business, and industry. And why you want to target that business and industry property tax relief? Because that's when people develop, that's when they expand buildings, that's when they grow jobs. That's what you want to do. And I believe the only way you'll reduce property taxes is taking something off the back of it. But I think the key here, this isn't about serving people with disabilities less. It's about serving people with disabilities better. That's a passion of mine. It's a field of expertise of mine. And I look forward to doing that as your next governor.
Mr. Roberts.
There's no question, but property taxes have become an impediment to business growth and development here in Iowa. We have 4 classifications of property tax in the state of Iowa: agriculture, residential, commercial, and industrial. We currently cap the ability to raise property taxes on agriculture and residential by 4%. I would submit that we also need to control the increases that often get shifted over to the commercial and industrial classifications. We also tie that to 4%. That would at least slow the rate of increase, but ultimately we have to have a hard look at just what we expect our property taxes to pay for with regard to local governments. A lot of our funding for local schools is placed on the back of property taxpayers. Counties and cities, for the most part, have a smaller portion of our local property tax bill. I think that the state should look seriously at providing more direct funding to our local schools, provide property tax relief in that way. And I also agree that mental health services that the counties pay for should be another targeted area where the state of Iowa should look at providing state resources rather than relying on property taxes to provide these services for people with disabilities. I think long term we should have a conversation with Iowans, find ways to prepare for the future, and find new structures and ways of delivering services to people with their local government services. And I think there are a lot of great ideas across Iowa. I'd like to initiate that conversation and find those best practices.
And Mr. Branstad.
Janine, your question was, how do we reduce commercial property taxes without impacting the other classes of property? And you know, Governor Culver 4 years ago ran on a platform of reducing commercial property taxes. He appointed a commission. The commission met, made recommendations. It was ignored. Nothing has been done. I have a plan that would work to reduce commercial property taxes, similar to what we did when I was governor, when we got rid of the property tax on machinery and equipment. And that made a big difference. We wouldn't have IPSCO Steel, Cedar River Paper, PMX, Barilla Pasta, many other capital-intensive industries in Iowa if we hadn't done that. On commercial property, what we did when we got rid of the tax on machinery and equipment, we eliminated it for the new, and then we phased it out over 10 years for the existing. For commercial property, what I've said, instead of taxing it at 100%, as Representative Roberts has already said, agriculture and residential are already limited. I took care of the commercial, of the industrial with eliminating it on equipment. What we need to do is tax it only at 60 or 65% of market value for the new commercial, and then phase it down for the existing. And then the state needs to provide assistance to local governments for the lost revenue over that 4 or 5 year period as we reduce it. But as we reduce that burden to 60 or 65%, it's going to be much more advantageous for new business and industry located in Iowa and create jobs in our state.
Thank you. Todd Dorman, you have our next question.
Can you name one service government provides today that you think it should stop providing in the interest of saving the budget? Mr. Roberts.
There are at least two that I can think of, but one that I would recommend immediately is that we have, I think, an issue here in Iowa where there are adults present in our state who reside in the state of Iowa illegally. They are not to be here. And I have recommended that we look seriously at denying benefits to resident alien adults in the state, and that we save perhaps as much as $92 million in state funding to those who have applied for benefits but are not entitled to them. I actually co-sponsored legislation this past year that would require the Department of Human Services to develop rules that would ensure that when a person applies for benefits through the Department of Human Services, they present a verifiable Social Security number. We've got to get a handle on just exactly who is applying for and receiving benefits at the expense of Iowa's taxpayers. And I think that we could save considerable amount of money if we would make certain that only those who are legally here and entitled to those benefits receive them.
Mr. Branstad.
I agree with Representative Roberts on that issue. I would also say we should not provide funding for organizations that provide abortion services. I think there's many other areas where we can also identify programs that have outlived their usefulness, and we need to set priorities. We need to go through every single item of the budget, and we need to eliminate those things that maybe we'd like but we can't afford to do. We need to protect those things that are higher priority or important, and we need to make the tough decisions. I think we can also reduce a lot of administrative costs in all areas of the government, including the delivery of services by area education agencies. There's a tremendous amount of administrative overhead there that I think can be reduced or eliminated and still provide quality services for children with disabilities and people that need special ed.
Mr. Vanderplots.
Well, this is kind of fun because I agree with both of my peers here. First of all, on the illegal immigration. If we can save $100 million from people who are here illegally, then we should do that. We shouldn't be granting services at the expense of the taxpayers. And that's why I came out very strong this week when Arizona brought up the new illegal immigration stance that they took and said that not only do I support that, but I would promote that as Iowa's next governor. We've had a federal government that's become totally inept on that issue. The other one I agree with is with Planned Parenthood or funding of abortions. I don't think that's a place for public funding whatsoever. We should be a culture that celebrates life, and I believe that's who we are. We shouldn't be funding for abortions. The AEAs as well, that's a $400 million bureaucracy on top of school districts. I think we need to redefine the area education agencies. I think it'd be a huge cost savings while putting more and more resources in the classroom. But I also think we have to take a look at universal preschool. K-12 educators, community colleges, private colleges, regent universities, they've all talked to me. As we expand universal preschool, that's $110 million when fully implemented. Philosophically, I believe that's in where the parents should be in charge, the churches should be in charge, nonprofits should be in charge, but I don't think that's where government should be. So philosophically and economically, I don't agree with that approach as well.
Thank you. And our next topic to have questions about, ironically, is about education after Mr. Vanderplot's last answer. And with that, we start with Janine Beck.
30 years ago, Iowa's public universities received nearly 3/4 of their funding from the state, with student tuition accounting for less than 1/4 of their revenue. Now, student and state contribution is nearly even. Is this the appropriate mix, or is this driving up student debt and pricing some middle-class Iowans out of higher education? And Mr. Branstad, we start with you.
You know, I went to a regent university. I come from a family that didn't have a lot of resources. I worked in the cafeteria during the school year, and I had a partial scholarship, and I also had loans. I'm proud to say that I never missed a payment. I paid all my loans back, but I didn't get my last loan paid back till after I was governor. So I'm sensitive to the concerns of students and the financial impact that the dramatic increases in tuition. And you will look back to the time I was governor. Even though we went through the farm crisis in tough times, we never increased tuition by double digits like they have during my successors. And now I look at the erratic action that we've seen, the reckless and irresponsible action of Governor Culver, first to provide a whole bunch of money, then through a 10% across the board, take it away. That's caused all kinds of disruption. Iowa State has had to dramatically reduce the extension program. It's caused problems at all of our universities. I'm one that's sensitive to higher education, and not just the state universities, the community colleges. That's where there's been big growth. I've been president of a private college. I know how important the tuition grant is to help Iowa students with financial need go to our private colleges and universities. And thank God we've got 30 great quality private institutions in the state, and I want to see the tuition grant supported as well.
Mr. Vanderplot.
Well, I agree. Higher education is one of the things we should be extremely proud of in the state of Iowa. The regent universities are private colleges. Both of my boys attend Northwestern in Orange City, so private colleges are very important to me. But the community colleges as well, I think they fulfill a huge void. And what's happened is that because of poor leadership and poor management, the ripple effect has been typically on the back of students with higher and higher tuition costs. I was presenting to the Iowa State College Republicans the other night, and they were talking about tuition. And I said, that's why you need a CEO from the private sector who knows how to produce more but with less, who can actually manage a state budget. And I'd like to get to the point that when we ask a student to contract with a regent university, say, I want to make a commitment to this regent university or to this community college or private college, that we'd be able to say, this is what your tuition is going to be as a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. You can trust our management, you can trust our leadership, and I think that's the direction we need to have. But when you have poor leadership, as we've talked about with Governor Culver time and time again, the ripple effect is going to fall on a lot of people that's been unintended, and in particular, in this case, on the backs of students and on the backs of parents. I think we need to do everything in our power to maintain and keep the private education, the regent universities, and the community colleges that we have, and make that commitment to students.
Mr. Roberts.
Great question. I also share the concern that is voiced in that question. The design of the Regents universities originally was for the public to contribute the majority of the funding for our Regents universities so that all people had access to higher education. And we're now closely approaching a mix of government resources and direct tuition resources that are almost 50-50. As governor, my goal would be to make certain that there is no more than 50% of funding for our Regents universities that comes from tuition. To be truly public, the public needs to contribute the majority of the resources. Now, there are three categories of students who receive, who pay tuition. And just recently it was announced that next year there'd be a 6% increase in tuition. We have in-state, out-of-state, and international students. I believe that we should take a very close look at the rate of increases applied to these three classifications of students. I don't understand why in-state Iowa students should have to pay a higher rate than what we would ask of our out-of-state students and certainly our international students. So I think that Iowans expect, if they're contributing to and funding Regents University education, that Iowa's young people have the opportunity to attend and know that their tuition will not constitute more than half of the total resources that our universities use.
Our next question comes from Todd Dorman.
And this is a subject that Mr. Vanderplatz has already broached, but in recent years the state has spent millions on preschool programs in the public schools. Do you think that can continue, or I mean, do you think the state has an interest in making sure that kids get quality preschool and are ready to learn by the time they get to the public schools?
I believe it's in all of our interests that kids are ready to learn by the time they get to schools. I think we need to determine whose responsibility is that. I think from any researcher's angle, and I've been in education, I've got a master's and specialist in education leadership, the formative years, 3 to 5, it's best with a mom and a dad. And one of the best things I could do is grow this economy so moms and dads have the ability to either provide for preschool or for one of them to stay home and provide that early education at that time. But as we continue to grow government and government programs and say we want to take over the child already at age 3 and have a mandatory program at that point, that's going to cost us $110 million. One is, I don't think we can afford it. We're taking a look at how do we fulfill our responsibility to K-12 education, to community colleges, to private colleges, to Regent universities, and all other forms of government. We continue to grow government to like it's the answer for everything. I think one of the best things we can do for preschool education is grow this economy so families can provide for themselves, so mom and dads can have that interest at the early years. And we need to encourage that formative development with moms and dads, reading to their children, taking an active role, have the churches, have the nonprofits. But $110 million, I think, is just going to be unsustainable as we take a look at the whole budget mix. That may not be popular, but at least it's honest.
Mr. Roberts.
I actually was present the year when Governor Culver initiated the proposal of a universal 4-year-old grade level to our public K-12 system. And I talked with teachers and administrators at that time, and they expressed concern that adding an entirely new grade level to our public K-12 system would eventually jeopardize the well-being of our funding to K-12 education. They said at some point the economy will have a slowdown and then we will be challenged to provide adequate funding for K-12. This next year, there is $45 million budgeted for this 4-year-old preschool program. Eventually, it will ramp up and cost at least $100 million. It's a classic example of state government going beyond our means, creating a new program that we could not sustain into the future, and the professionals who were on the front line several years ago gave good advice and said, don't do it. Now we find ourselves in a budget problem the likes we've never seen, and we would have been far better off focusing these priorities on K-12. Now they see themselves as being shortchanged across the board. We would have been better off allowing our private providers to continue providing that quality education for our 4-year-olds. And I think that long term, we probably need to look seriously at not providing that level, and that we would look to empowerment to provide those services.
Mr. Branstad.
Well, I agree with Representative Roberts. Again, this was a reckless and irresponsible thing that Governor Culver did. I do support preschool. I support Head Start. I support private preschool programs. I support financial aid for families with need. But I don't think the public schools ought to have to take over the education of all 3- and 4-year-olds. I agree that that primarily should be the focus of the families and we should provide financial assistance to those in need. But I think it's a terrible mistake for the state to take on new obligations that we can't afford, and we can see the example of what's happened. We've seen massive across the boards, big layoffs in public school education because we're trying to do more than we can realistically do. What we do, we need to do well. We need to focus on the basic. We need to provide a good quality K through 12 education and increase the quality and the opportunity for our students instead of trying to do things that we can't afford to do.
Our next question about education comes from Paul Yeager.
Well, we know that education is 67% of the total budget, so it's a big deal. What is the one tangible thing besides the preschool that you three have talked about to get the most for our money in K-12, community colleges, and the Regents universities? Mr. Roberts?
Well, there's no question. When you talk to Iowans, they have a very clear sense of what the priority services they expect from state government, whether it's public safety, law enforcement, corrections, access to justice, focusing on commerce, and then ultimately education. And Iowans highly value a good quality education. K-12 is of priority concern to Iowans. They want to see resources adequately funding our K-12 schools, because as our local schools go, so go our local communities, Main Street, families who live all across the state in cities and towns of every size. And they want to make certain that when our young people graduate from high school, they have the opportunity to attend either a great community college close to their immediate area so they can develop the trades and professional skills to enter the job market, or they want to know that we've prioritized funding for the Iowa Tuition Grant so they can attend one of our outstanding private universities, and then also to prioritize funding for our Regents universities. And again, I think the state should focus the resources we have on public safety, access to justice, certainly economic development, but ultimately education in Iowa. It matters to Iowans, and that should be a focus, and it will be of mine as governor.
Mr. Branstad.
Education should focus on the things that are most important to the children, and that is the classroom and the teachers in the classroom. My daughter, Allison Costa, who's a third grade teacher in Waukee, is with me here today. And I hear from her all the time about how important it is, first of all, that the parents are involved and engaged in their children's education, and that we provide quality opportunities in the classroom. We need to reduce some of the mandates and some of the other things we've pushed onto school districts, asking them to do things that are not what the responsibilities of the classroom should be. And we need to reduce some of the administrative and overhead costs so that more of our resources go to the classroom. And we should reward good teachers, and we ought to reward good schools that are doing a good job. But we need to have uniform assessments, and we need to make adjustments and changes so we can increase the results and the test scores of our students in this state. They've dropped dramatically since I was governor in the 90s. We used to be number 1, number 2 in the nation, and now in the NAEP scores last year, we ranked 28th in 8th grade math. We ranked 26th in 4th grade reading. That's not acceptable. We need to restore our focus on quality and put the emphasis on providing the resources to the teachers in the classroom.
Mr. Vanderplots.
I believe the question was about how do we get more bang for the dollar out of education, since it's such a big part of our budget. And I've said all over the campaign trails that we need to get our arms around K-12 education in general, otherwise you're just messing around with the budget. We need to simplify education. I used to be a teacher, and I used to be a high school principal. And let me tell you, in the 1990s, we started growing bureaucracy at the expense of the classroom. It started with human growth and development, which sounds good. It leads to comprehensive sex education into kindergarten. We've decided that the schools have to be raising our children, and we grew a bureaucracy and a bureaucracy and a bureaucracy at the expense of a classroom. I think we need to simplify the system, and that way we'll put more dollars back in the classroom. How do you do that? 21st century student performance standards and expectations. Kids have always risen, they always will rise to the expectation. You simplify the funding back to local school districts, so local school districts can actually lead again instead of being mandated by Des Moines, or worse yet, Washington, D.C. Then how about if we do something novel? Let's let the teachers teach. Let's let the teachers teach. And I really believe when you let local school districts lead, you let teachers teach, you will create an element of research and design, innovation and creativity, where the cream rises to the top and we have best practices. Then you hold the local school districts accountable to the highest of expectations and be transparent with the results. We can put more resources in the classroom, but we need to reduce that bureaucracy that was started in the 90s.
Time now for our next topic of discussion, and we will go to economic development and redevelopment. And Todd Dorman, you have the next question.
It's a subject we're interested in here in this city. I'm wondering, will you pledge to provide substantial state investment in a comprehensive system of levees and flood walls to protect Cedar Rapids from another catastrophic flood, and also for watershed management steps that could protect pretty much the state of Iowa from the risk of flooding?
Mr. Branstad, you start.
Well, first of all, I know that Cedar Rapids was devastated by the floods in 2008, and I don't think that should be just the state's responsibility. I think the Army Corps of Engineers has a big role to play in making these decisions. I think the state should cooperate and work with local governments in terms of dealing with it. And I understand that's been a very difficult thing, and I also, I guess, have some real misgivings about arbitrarily saying now we're going to go to a 500-year flood situation as opposed to a 100-year flood situation, which drives up the cost dramatically and makes it almost unaffordable. And so I think we have to look at it, and we need to look at it in what is fair and what is a cost-effective way. I certainly want to see things that have been damaged by the flood, like the Czech and Slovak Museum, rebuilt. My wife and I contributed to that. My wife is partially of Czech descent, and she even served on that board for a while. We want to see those things restored and improved. But I also think we've got to be cost effective and realistic in terms of what kind of resources are going to put in, and there can't be a blank check given on these situations. So we have to look at it in a very thoughtful and realistic way, and we need to work with the people who are affected, the businesses and the homeowners, as well as with the community.
Mr. Vanderplots.
You know, the flood was the worst natural disaster in our state's history. I believe the 5th worst in our country's history, ranking behind Katrina. I believe we need to do what the states are supposed to do, is come alongside the local community, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, other communities, come along the county management teams, and see what we can do, as well as with the federal government, but do a cost-benefit analysis. You know, what makes good common sense for prevention efforts, but also then response efforts. I came to Cedar Rapids after the flood took place, and in a baseball cap and blue jeans, and helped hand out things, and to see the resilience of the people here in the I-80 corridor, it was truly inspiring for me. But it's also why you need a governor who can manage a budget. I mean, we should have had an economic emergency reserve fund, which used to be called the rainy day fund. I don't know if there would have ever been a time than that flood of 2008 for the rainy day fund to be in place. As everybody was saying, you know, let's get the people back into the homes, let's get the people back in the homes, I was saying that as well, but I also wanted to get people back into business and industry. I think that would have been a great time for, again, Governor Culver to call a special session, if nothing else, for symbolically to say all hands on deck. And then to provide some real property tax relief for business and industry so we can create an enterprise zone in Cedar Rapids, this I-80 corridor, because as the strength of this I-80 corridor goes, so goes the state of Iowa. But that takes leadership and management of a budget.
Mr. Roberts.
The destruction caused by the flood is of a proportion that most Iowans, unless they've actually personally visited neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids, just cannot comprehend. And I have made several visits to those affected areas. And when we talk about the impact to the local economy, you can't really fully understand just how significant and severe this impact was unless you see how it affected families. There are blocks and blocks of homes still in areas of Cedar Rapids that are unoccupied, where just 2 weeks ago I spent time traveling through the Northwest Neighborhood area and met with members of the Northwest Neighborhood Association and listened to them as they described the plight of still not having any resolution to the problems they've been dealing with ever since the flood. When that flood occurred, Chet Culver should have called the legislature into special session. We do have an economic emergency fund. It had $150 million in it. Republicans, I included, called for immediately appropriating every dollar out of the economic emergency fund for immediate flood relief and assistance and recovery. Instead, only $50 million was appropriated, $100 million was held back. As governor, I'll make certain that that is a priority and that we treat people well to begin with, because it's their lives that have been devastated. Every dollar of that fund should have been appropriated to the flood-affected areas in East Central Iowa.
Our next question comes from Paul Yeager.
Let's talk about tax credits. There are issues of, or examples of exploited tax credits. We'll see the tax credit, the movie tax credit script for that story. But if you want to put more oversight in there, that becomes more government. But if you reduce tax credits, you're likely going to reduce activity that would come from those credits. So what tax credit, if you could add one and take one away, which one would you do on either side?
And Mr. Vanderplots, you start.
Well, first of all, let me disagree politely with your premise, because I believe you need to get government out of the business of picking winners and losers. And we saw that with the film tax credit incentive program on steroids. That's why I've advocated right away that we eliminate the corporate income tax, because everybody understands zero. There's no program oversight at that point. There's no more bureaucracy to oversee that. I come from Sioux City, Iowa, where we live right next to the border of South Dakota, and believe me, 0% sales. And so first of all, we need to do a 0%, get government out of the business of picking winners and losers. And then, as I talked earlier, let's drastically reduce business and industry and commercial property tax. And you do that by removing mental health and developmental disabilities off of it. Because the only plan to really reduce property taxes is if you take something off the back of it. That's why I've said I'd like to see Iowa be the startup capital of the world, which means you also need to drastically reduce capital gains tax. I've suggested from 8.98% to about 3.5%. And the reason is we shouldn't be penalizing people for being successful. Because when they're successful and say they sell and they make a profit, and a profit, by the way, is still a good thing. And all of a sudden they have liquidity and they can invest and they can have private venture capital. We can be the startup capital of the world, but it's going to take leadership. It's going to be a tax structure, a regulatory structure, and a governor that will market this state as a right-to-work state.
Mr. Roberts.
There's no question but what the use of targeted tax credits has been the preferred method of stimulating the economy and incenting business here in Iowa. The dilemma has become over 10 to 12 and more years, we have now created so many of these programs that state government is actually now in the business of picking winners and losers. And I think we've reached a point where we need to stop and evaluate all of these tax credits and determine perhaps there are some still doing the original intent and accomplishing something very good. You can keep those in place. Others we might reduce, and still others we might just now eliminate them altogether because they've served their purpose. I believe it would be far better to eliminate that approach in time and then replace it with simply eliminating taxes on business. I was the first Republican candidate for governor to propose eliminating the corporate income tax. It would be better if we just level the playing field, provide the profit incentive for business to keep its own capital to invest in its own future expansion, be it with facilities, purchasing new equipment, new technology. I've talked with business leaders across the state and asked what it would mean to their businesses if they had that capital available, if we eliminated the corporate income tax, and they said they would invest in facilities development and it would lead to job creation. And with 115,000 Iowans out of work, we've got to do things dramatically different, and prioritizing job creation through stimulating the private sector by tax cuts would be my preferred method.
Mr. Branstad.
The targeted tax credit for movie making was a huge mistake. And it's another example of the reckless and irresponsible way that Culver is managed. And not only they didn't put the right people in charge and they didn't oversee it. I started the department. I started the film office. And, you know, we got Field of Dreams, Bridges of Madison County, Miles from Home, all kinds of movies here without a tax credit. We were able to attract them because of Iowa's friendliness and our cooperative spirit. We don't need to give away tens of millions of dollars, and the Iowa taxpayers are now on the hook for that. But there are some tax credits that are important. The industrial job training tax credit that's administered by the community colleges, started in 1983, has helped all kinds of Iowa companies expand and grow and new companies to locate in our state. We shouldn't eliminate that. We also should keep the research tax credit. That's helped Rockwell Collins, big employer that's grown here, and this session the legislature is cutting that back. We wouldn't have gotten the expansion from Pioneer Hybrid or the DuPont in Johnston if we didn't have that tax credit, or Kemen. I can go on with many other quality, high-paying, high-tech jobs that we need to keep in Iowa. But we ought to reduce the ones that are ineffective and wasteful, and we ought to use that to reduce the tax rates for businesses.
Our next question comes from Janine Beck.
If elected, will you continue to support the Iowa Values Fund, the business and grant and loan program created during the Vilsack administration, and also the Renewable Energy Grant Program established by Governor Culver, known as the Iowa Power Fund? And Mr. Roberts, we begin with you.
I think this question aligns very well with the previous question. I think that the tendency of state government, if provided resources, people get creative and they start new programs. And I really question the wisdom of simply trying to devise state-run programs to try and stimulate the private sector. I think much like the targeted tax credits, we need to evaluate the Iowa Values Fund on an ongoing, continual basis, and the Iowa Power Fund, and determine whether or not the amount of money appropriated for these programs is still at a proper level. $25 million is currently appropriated for the Iowa Power Fund. I think we ought to take a serious look at whether or not that's the amount of money actually needed. If not, we ought to reduce the appropriation. But ultimately, we ought to, I believe, move away from creating these programs where it's Des Moines trying to figure out how to stimulate the economy, and simply say it's time that state government stop meddling and provide a friendly business environment through a friendly tax program as well as a friendly regulatory environment. And I think we get a whole lot more out of our businesses if we allowed them to simply compete and have those incentives to be profitable than what we get through these specially created programs by those who think they know best in Des Moines.
Mr. Branstad.
I agree with Representative Roberts. I think we ought to be reducing these new credits that have been created and use that money instead to reduce the tax rate for businesses, to make Iowa more competitive, level the playing field so that our tax rates are lower than our neighboring states, and so it's welcoming to businesses to want to expand and grow in Iowa. When we got rid of the tax on machinery and equipment, it made a big difference in getting capital-intensive companies here. People like PMX and Cedar River Paper located here in the Lynn County area and all over the state of Iowa, the whole complex at Eddyville, Roquettes, and many others located in our state. And if we could reduce the corporate tax rates, and if we can reduce the property tax on commercial property, I think we can have similar growth. And that's how I think we can generate the jobs and the wealth and keep more of our young people here once they graduate from education.
Mr. Vanderplots.
Well, let me attempt to answer the question. First of all, with the Values Fund. To me, that was the government trying to pick winners and losers on steroids. If I remember Governor Vilsack at the time, he said he was doing the Values Fund so that we could compete with South Dakota. If I recall Governor Rounds of South Dakota, he took out a full-page ad, and it said 3 words: bring it on. And the reason is Governor Rounds knew that the amount of tax that corporation pays, that sells. And that's why I've advocated for the 0% corporate income tax and then drastically reducing property tax by taking something off the back of it and bringing it to the state level. So the Values Fund, I don't think that's the right approach. I think creating a level and fair playing field for everybody. As it goes to the Iowa Power Fund, I think if you do a cost-benefit analysis on that, the cost has been exorbitant to the state, really for the benefit that's come out of it. I support the renewable fuels energy. I'm not big into mandates, but I am big into the marketplace. I think we need to move from E10 to E20. I think it needs to be in our distribution center that we have a better distribution outlet. And it's good to talk about machinery and equipment taxes and removing that. But if I talk to local leaders, they say it's one of the reasons we're in the top 5 of property taxes today, because it just got dumped on the back of property taxes. If you're going to remove it, you need to bring it to the state level. And that's what I advocate with doing that with mental health and developmental disabilities, to really reduce property taxes so they have a real savings.
Our next topic of discussion will be immigration. And our first question is Paul Yeagers.
On Friday, 2 of you came out in favor of a bill, adopting a bill similar to what Arizona passed and signed into legislation this week. With that in mind, Iowa is struggling to retain people, especially in the rural areas. How can immigration be used to repopulate the state?
Mr. Branstad, you start.
Well, first of all, I'm proud to say that Iowa has always been very welcoming to people that come here legally. Governor Ray helped welcome people from Southeast Asia. When I was governor, the Berlin Wall went down, the Soviet Union collapsed, and we had a lot of people come from Eastern Europe. They came here legally. We welcomed them. They have done well and have become good citizens. But we don't want people coming here illegally and using our resources. And as we said before, we don't want them to be able to take welfare and Medicaid and Iowa Cares money away from our own citizens. And we don't want sanctuary cities, and we don't want to see amnesty for people that come here illegally. You saw what happened up in Postville. Now, the good news is the individual that was responsible for that has been convicted and is going to spend a long time in prison. The new owner, Hershey Friedman, is coming with a whole new attitude. He's invested $40 million in that plant at Postville. He's already hired 600 or 700 people back, and he's providing good opportunities, and he's checking to make sure all the people that are employed there are there legally. That's what we need to require and expect from our employers in the state of Iowa. If the federal government refuses to enforce, and it's their responsibility to enforce the immigration laws, then we should work with local law enforcement to fashion something that meets Iowa. We're not Arizona. We're not a border state. We ought to do something that fits the needs of our state, Iowa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Branstad. Mr. Vanderplots.
Well, again, when I came out with my economic development platform, you would see that I want to make Iowa hospitable for Iowans. I want to make Iowa hospitable for those people who left Iowa, want to come back to Iowa. But I also said I want to embrace legal immigration. I want to attract the best and the brightest here to start up business and industry. It's not that I'm against immigration. Matter of fact, I've said if you let the Dutch in, Vanderplots, you should let anybody in. But they came here legally. And that's the key difference. Now, on illegal immigration, there's nothing honoring about being illegal. And I believe we need to hold accountable. We have a federal government that's been completely inept on this. And Governor Branstad is right. We're not Arizona, but illegal is illegal. And Iowans still have a real respect for the rule of law. So I believe we need to hold those who are here illegally accountable. I believe we need to hold those people who knowingly employ, knowingly transport, or knowingly harbor accountable. And hopefully if enough states like Arizona, like Oklahoma, when I'm governor, like Iowa, we say, you know what, we are going to hold accountable because we have a respect for the rule of law. Maybe the federal government will start listening. Maybe Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid will say, you know what, they're telling us they don't want us to take over their health care, but that's what we're doing. But they also tell us they want us to seal the borders and enforce a process of legal immigration. And that's not what we're doing. You know, maybe the federal government needs to listen, but if they're not going to listen, then I think the states need to stand up and take a role here. And I think that is the responsibility of the next governor of the state of Iowa.
Mr. Roberts.
Iowa has always been a very welcoming place, and we're certainly a people comprised of many different cultures and ethnic groups. And people still desire to come to the United States, and people come to Iowa, and we welcome them, but they come here legally. One of the reasons why Iowans feel so strongly about this issue is because Iowans, like Americans everywhere, but particularly here in Iowa, we highly value and prize the meaning and the value of citizenship. It's something very precious. And those who come here legally and work hard, and many of them go on to apply for citizenship, and they become citizens. They too highly prize that very important status. But those who come illegally should know that when it comes to the law, it will be enforced. The citizens of this state are not obligated to provide taxpayer-funded benefits to people who are here illegally. If they're here illegally, we should say no to providing benefits, remove the incentive for being here, and they will relocate somewhere else. I believe we should require people to verify that they are actually who they are when they apply for benefits from the state of Iowa. Businesses should also verify that people they employ are here legally. And if businesses don't do that, then there should be punitive measures. We want to welcome people. We want Iowa to be home to new people, but we want them to come legally and enjoy citizenship like all of the rest of us do.
Our next question comes from Janine Beck.
Should the children of illegal immigrants be allowed to qualify for in-state tuition at the colleges and community colleges in Iowa? Mr. Vanderplat?
No. And it's not because I'm against the children, but it is an opportunity for those, again, who are legally to qualify for those opportunities, whether it be community colleges or whether it be for regent universities or for private colleges. Again, to go back to the business for a second, businesses are not INS agents. I also think that we need to develop a process where businesses clearly know, is this person here legally or are they here illegally? It's for those businesses who knowingly hire illegal immigrants that we hold them accountable. And when you hold those businesses accountable, I believe then you'll dry up the reason for them to be here, for families to be here, and then all of a sudden there won't be the burden on our Department of Human Services or Department of Education or inside of our schools. But on the academic side of it as well, Jenny, I want to put out one other thing from an academic standpoint. If there are students in our schools who can't speak the English language, the most honoring thing to do for that student and for that student's peers is make sure that student learns English first before they go through academic curriculum. That honors that student to go through academic curriculum so that he or she can be successful, but it also honors that student's peers that we're speaking a common language within inside our classrooms, English is our common language, so that the whole class can advance together.
Mr. Roberts.
To the earlier question related to immigration, if you eliminate those taxpayer-provided state benefits to adults who are here illegally, and if it's not possible for them to be employed, to have a job without being here legally, these folks will not live here. They will move from Iowa. And when they move, their children will move with them. I think the secret to addressing this problem is very simply, we deal with the adults who are here illegally, make it so that there isn't an incentive to stay if you're here illegally, and in time, I think we address the illegal immigration problem that challenges Iowa, and we're certainly not a border state like Arizona. We need to custom tailor the way that we address this problem based on the situation here in Iowa. And we certainly have to take the initiative on our own because the federal government is unwilling to do that on our behalf. So as governor, I will proactively work toward ensuring that only those who are qualified, who are here legally, and who are citizens receive taxpayer benefits if they are needed. Those who are not here legally should not receive them, and I think that also eventually addresses the issue of children or young people.
Mr. Branstad.
Children of people that are here illegally should not get the benefits of in-state tuition at any of our colleges or universities. I also agree with Representative Roberts. We need to verify, we need to ensure that people are getting benefits, whether it's from the Department of Human Services or other departments or agencies of government, verify that they're here legally. If they're not, they should not be receiving benefits. I actually served on a commission on health care, and when former Governor Vilsack and some of the Democrats in that committee were insisting that we provide health care benefits, which the federal government doesn't even do, to illegal children of illegals, I vote, not only did I vote against it, I resigned, because that is not the reason. We should be, yes, trying to provide health care coverage for people in our state that have needs. But this idea of providing benefits that are people here illegally, absolutely not. We need to draw the line on that.
Our next question from Todd Dorman.
There's been talk among you of savings possibly by ending illegal immigration, but aren't there also budgetary burdens that might be borne by local governments and state government if you take over immigration enforcement from the federal government?
Mr. Roberts?
Well, I think if you're someone in law enforcement, and even if you're the governor or someone in an elected position, your first responsibility, if you've taken the oath to the Constitution and the oath implies and states you're going to uphold the law, you enforce the law. There would be costs probably associated with enforcing the law that requires that we look very carefully at how we're addressing our illegal immigrant problem. The concern that I have, if you adopted Arizona's law just as it's written, the implication is someone who is actually convicted of being here illegally could be imprisoned for up to 6 months. That's where the real cost issue comes. if you were going to provide jail space and prison space for all of these individuals, how much money is that going to cost the taxpayers of Iowa? So there is an effect. I'm not sure, given the numbers in Iowa, and the range is maybe 30,000 to 50,000, if we have near the problem that Arizona does, but we're going to require law enforcement, you enforce the law. And certainly, if you're the governor of Iowa, you don't tell law enforcement, ignore the law, you enforce the law, and you do what the law requires you to do.
Mr. Branstad.
Well, immigration is a primary responsibility of the federal government, but state and local law enforcement need to work and enforce it. I would also point out we are paying a big price right now for the meth and other illegal drugs that are being smuggled here by illegals. And it's costing us a lot. It's costing us lives of Iowa citizens. And it's also costing us law enforcement. So I think if we're effective in keeping the illegals out, we can also help reduce the meth trade and some of the other illegal, and also, let alone keeping out the dangerous terrorists that want to do harm to us. That's an important part of it as well. I think we need to keep the pressure on the federal government to live up to their part of the bargain. It's their responsibility, but we also need to work closely with state and local law enforcement, as they've been doing, and trying to deal with the meth and some of the other problems. But we need to make sure that we're effectively dealing with that to protect the safety and well-being of our citizens. That's the primary responsibility of the governor and the elected officials in the state.
Mr. Vanderplots.
Well, I don't know about you, but I do know about me. I'm tired of relying on the federal government. In our house, we have a simple saying, and the saying goes like this: you'll never be right when you do what's wrong, but you'll never be wrong when you do what's right. And I believe holding people accountable to the highest of standards, especially as something that this country was built on, immigration, is the right thing to do. And again, Todd, I probably disagree with the premise of the question. I don't think we're going to absorb more cost. I think we're actually going to save money if we hold people who are here illegally accountable. I visited with a drug agency task force. And as I sat down, I visited with them, I said, what's the answer to this problem? They're talking to me about how we're almost like a distribution warehouse for illegal drugs and illegal weapons, and they're hiding under a legal base of population, which is dishonoring, again, to the people who are here legally. And the response to me was, you need to secure the border. You need to hold illegal immigrants accountable for being here. So I believe that's what we need to do, so we will respect the rule of law. So I don't think it's going to cost a lot more money, but the federal government is going to be inept in this case. I think the state of Iowa needs to take responsibility, needs to take leadership, have the highest of standards, and hold those who are here illegally accountable.
It's time to change topics again, and this time our topic will be same-sex marriage. And with the first question, Janine Beck.
There's been some division among you of how to address the Supreme Court's ruling on same-sex marriage. If you do not win the Republican nomination, will you urge conservative members of your party to support the nominee? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Branstad.
Yes, of course. I'm a team player, and I've always supported the Republican Party and the nominee, and I will support the nominee for governor, and I will support all the Republican candidates because I think it's critically important. We're at a critical crossroads. The national debt under Obama has gone up $1.4 trillion. Under Culver, we've got reckless and irresponsible spending, and he's not made good decisions. He's not chosen good people. He doesn't even have budget hearings. So we must have a new governor, and we must have new leadership, and I'm going to do all I can to work hard for this Republican effort and to be successful. Obviously, I want to be and I hope to be the nominee, but I will wholeheartedly work for and support the nominee and the entire Republican team.
Mr. Vanderplots.
I believe I've proven to be a team player. Most of you know in 2006, I laid down my bid for governor to join Jim Nussle as lieutenant governor to bring the party together so that we would have a united front so that we could win. Obviously, that didn't work out. What I will say is I've never endorsed a Democrat. And so I don't know about being a team player if it just has state borders, because I believe Governor Branstad, you did endorse Ben Nelson, who helped give us socialized medicine when you skipped the river into Nebraska, when we could have won
I
that.
never went to Nebraska.
When you could have, but you did endorse Ben Nelson, is that correct?
He's a longtime friend, and I was out of office at the time.
But we still endorsed a Democrat.
Yeah, I
that
know,
helped
but this
give
is
us
supposed to
some
be on
funds.
the subject.
This is on the subject. It's about being
Mr. Vanderplatz, please finish up your answer, please.
It's about it being a team player. I do plan on being the Republican nominee. And what I would tell you as the Republican nominee, whether it's Representative Roberts or former Governor Branstad or myself, it carries a huge responsibility. And that responsibility is to authentically earn the endorsement and support of the peers in the race, as well as the peers' followers in the race. I think when that happens, Republicans are going to be inspired. Republicans are going to win back the governorship. I believe Republicans will win back the Iowa House, and I think we'll make great gains, if not win back the Iowa Senate. This state wants new leadership, but they want leadership that is committed to principled conservative values with a compelling vision for the state of Iowa.
Mr. Roberts.
I will certainly support the nominee of the Republican Party. Iowans, whether they're Republicans, independent registered voters, and yes, even Democrats, believe that Chet Culver has failed in his leadership position as the governor of our state. They would like to see a new governor, and I believe that they're looking for a conservative governor to lead Iowa into the future. It's important that Republicans be united, and I believe I'm the candidate that can best unite Republicans, and then I think I can also share a message with all Iowans that can bring us together. We need to be a united party. I will support the nominee. Obviously, I believe that I'm the best candidate to take on Chet Culver. I'm the Republican he doesn't want to see in November, but I will certainly support the Republican nominee for governor. Any one of us up here this afternoon will do a far better job as the governor of Iowa than Chet Culver. He needs to go.
Next question from Todd Dorman.
Can you identify one tangible way Iowa has been harmed during a full year of legal same-sex marriage?
Mr. Vanderplatz, your first answer.
Well, I've taken a very bold issue on this, Todd, and I happen to believe that marriage is a foundation to society. I believe it was designed for procreation and the development of a civilized society. And that's a personal conviction of mine. It's not a political position of mine. However, I think it goes beyond that. Is what the Supreme Court did on April 3, 2009, quite frankly, they can't do. They legislated from the bench when they made law. They executed from the bench when they ordered all 99 counties to follow suit. They can't execute anything. But worse than that, they attempted to amend your Constitution by saying they're going to hold up Iowa's Constitution to an evolving standard with every generation. They don't get to evolve our Constitution. Only we, the people, get to amend and evolve the Constitution. That's why I've been the only candidate to say, you know what, we need to hold the Supreme Court in check. And I plan on doing that on day one, to issue the executive order, to place a stay on that April 3 opinion, halting same-sex marriages, until the legislature either deals with it or until they pass it off to the people of Iowa for a vote. This is a freedom issue. Because if they'll do this with marriage, they will do this with private property. They'll do it with free speech, they'll do it with freedom of religion, free enterprise, the 10th Amendment, the Second Amendment, any freedom we hold dear. And that's why when the governor upholds the oath to the Constitution, part of that includes separation of powers. That's why I will insert myself on day one.
Mr. Roberts.
I think the harm that's been done is what I've discovered is the response of Iowans across the state who are unhappy that they have not been allowed the opportunity to weigh in on this very important issue. When the branches of government have such a sharp disagreement over a subject as important as the definition of marriage, the Constitution says go directly to the people and give them an opportunity to address that issue and consider amending their state constitution by putting that statute into the supreme law. What I've heard from Iowans all across the state is, let us vote. I believe that's the right thing to do. It's the respectful thing to do. So the harm has been when it comes to the people of Iowa and their attitude toward elected officials thwarting their will that simply asks, let us vote on the question. I don't believe that the governor can hold the Supreme Court in check. The people of Iowa hold the justices of our Supreme Court to accountability. And in November, there will be a retention election on the general election ballot, and 3 of our current justices will be up for retention. The people of Iowa will make a decision about these justices. We are all, whether you're the governor, a legislator, or a justice on the Supreme Court, accountable to the people. They hold all of us in check.
Mr. Branstad.
The Supreme Court is not above the law, but neither is the governor. And what Bob is advocating is clearly won't hold up. When Vilsack tried to do something like that by executive order, Congressman Steve King, when he was a state senator, sued and was successful, and it was struck down by the court. You will not be successful in that effort. Instead, I agree with Representative Roberts. The final say should be with the people. And that's what people are so angry about. That an unelected Supreme Court went against the will of the people in a law that I signed, Defense of Marriage Act, that says marriage is between one man and one woman. And the people should have a right to vote on that. The only thing that's preventing that is the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate are not letting that resolution come up for a vote. We need to replace them. That is arrogant and irresponsible on their part. We need to replace them with responsible Republicans that will let the people vote on this. I believe Iowans will do what 31 other states have done, and that is, through a constitutional amendment, vote of the people, restore one man, one woman marriage, and that's in this state. Every state where it's come up for a vote, from Maine to California, it's been approved. That's what we need to do in Iowa.
Our next question comes from Paul Yeager.
If the three of you, or one of the three of you elected governor, your inauguration would be almost 2 years after the April decision. Would same-sex marriage still be a top 3 priority at that point?
Mr. Roberts.
I have concluded, based on what I've heard from Iowans, that this will be a priority with them. Even though I believe we have multiple challenges confronting us as a state, whether it be out-of-control spending and a budget mess the likes we've not seen, that will be a top priority of mine as governor, to restrain this uncontrolled spending and realign expenditures with revenue, to focus on what it takes to stimulate our economy, to see business expand and create thousands of new jobs. This will be a lingering concern for Iowans because, again, it illustrates something fundamentally important to Iowans. In a matter of this importance, we have made it abundantly clear that we want to weigh in on this, and we want to answer that question. 31 other states, when the people have been allowed to vote on the question, have upheld traditional marriage as one man, one woman. This is not going to go away, and even if that inauguration is 2 years removed from the court's ruling, the people have made it clear we still want to vote because this ultimately is about respect for the people who are in charge of government. It's not the court. It's not the legislature. It's not the governor. The people of this state are in charge of their government, and they want to vote on this, and I'm sure they will be as passionate about this in 2 years as they were right after April 3rd.
Mr. Branstad.
I agree. The people of Iowa deserve the right to vote on an issue of this magnitude. As governor, my priority is going to be to restore fiscal responsibility and put the focus on jobs. But I'm also responsive to the people, and people are angry that the court has struck down a law that was duly enacted by the legislature and signed by the governor, and they deserve a right to vote on a constitutional amendment to restore one man, one woman marriage, and I will support the effort to see that that gets done. And the way we can do that is to elect a Republican House and Senate that will give this an opportunity to come to a vote. There are Democrats in the House and the Senate that would vote for it if given the opportunity, but their leaders have not let it come to a vote. That's not right. It's not fair. It's not representative government. It needs to change.
Mr. Vanderplots.
That's why we need leadership. This is a key differential in this race. I was speaking to the University of Iowa College Republicans. I had a young man say to me, he said, Mr. Vanderplots, with jobs in the economy, with budget, with education, with everything else, are you sure on day one you want to issue the executive order? I said, yes, I want to issue the executive order. Because it is about being responsive to the will of the people. It's about leadership. It's about holding a court in check. What Governor Vilsack tried to do is he tried to create law by saying felons should have the right to vote.
He wanted to let men, two men.
Taking my time. Is this
Mr. Branstad,
That's not. You're wrong in what you're saying.
Well, I think I'm right with my time.
Go ahead and look it up.
Right with my time, though. Is when Governor Vilsack tried to allow felons the right to vote, Steve King stepped in and said, you can't give felons the right to vote. You can't legislate from the governor's office. I'm not legislating from the governor's office. I'm holding a court in check. So if a court says, I'm going to take your private property, or I'm going to take your guns, do we say, you know what, let's have the people vote on this 4 years from now in 2014? No, what it needs to be is the governor needs to insert himself and say on day one, I'm holding a court in check, and we're going to follow the process, not for the governor to make law, but for the legislature to make law, not for the governor to execute law, and for the people of Iowa to amend the Constitution. Because otherwise, no matter what economic development policy you have, education policy you have, budgetary policy you have, if the court can just turn it over, then why have a legislature? Why have a governor? That's why David Barton of Wall Builders, he endorses this campaign. So many constitutional lawyers and historians, they want this issue because they believe not only will it provide leadership for Iowa, but it'll provide leadership across the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderplots. And our next topic will be dealing with health care. And the first question to Todd Dorman.
Do you believe that obesity is a problem that should be addressed through government action, such as limiting unhealthy ingredients in food? Mr. Branstad.
First of all, I spent the last 6 years and 3 months as the president of Des Moines University, and we got the Wellness Council of America Platinum Level Award for what we did for wellness for our faculty, staff, and students. And what we did is we focused on helping preserve health, and we did health risk assessments for all faculty, staff, and students. We focused on nutrition and exercise and things like that. No, I don't think government ought to be in there mandating what food you can buy. I don't think so at all. I like the approach that Hy-Vee is using right now. What Hy-Vee is doing, and they're doing this voluntarily, and I think it's a great idea, and I'd like Iowa to become the healthiest state in the nation, and I want to work with Rick Juergens and Hy-Vee on this, and that is they're labeling nutrition value of their foods from 1 to 100. And then you can choose as a consumer to do the right thing. And I also think in our insurance, we ought to say, if you do the wrong thing, if you don't do things to reduce your risks, such as cholesterol and things like that, or smoking, then you're going to pay more in insurance rates than somebody that does the right things. But government ought not be in there mandating what foods that you ought to buy or what foods you ought to consume. That is an individual consumer choice. We ought to do all we can to educate people about the importance of good nutrition and avoiding high-risk foods.
Mr. Vanderplots.
The answer to the question, Todd, no. I don't believe government should be in the business of mandating the food intake that we have. I think it's a freedom choice of ours. However, I do believe there is a role for the governor in this area to model nutrition as well. And I try to run 25 miles a week. Part of the reason is I'm eating a lot of pizza on this tour of Pizza and Politics all around the state right now. So I'm trying to run 25 miles a week. But it's also the intake. Now, I'll be the first one to admit I like ice cream. And I eat ice cream every night, but right now I've been 62 days without it. The last 100 days of the campaign, I gave up ice cream because I'm going to celebrate with a cold one on primary night, a cold bowl of ice cream, that is. And but I think so we can model it. I think we also need to provide education for that. But I don't think the government should be in the role of mandating what we eat. I think the more we're educated, the more we take better health or better care of ourselves, that's in our best interest. That's why I'm a big supporter of health savings accounts, medical savings accounts. That is personal responsibility for your health care. I think that's a very, very good thing. So I'd be much more on the modeling approach and the education approach, not on what we mandate approach.
Mr. Roberts.
Well, this is where we catch up on whatever time we've been losing, because I'm not going to take a full 90 seconds. A lot has been said by the other two gentlemen, and I agree with them. The short answer to the question is no, it's not the role of government to be mandating something like telling Iowans or Americans, you know, you're obese and this is what you're going to have to do to address your problem. So I agree with the statements made earlier, and it's not the role of government to get that intrusive in people's lives.
Our next question will come from Paul Yeager, and due to the time right now, we're going to make these answers 60 seconds, candidates. So, Mr. Yeager, your next question.
That means I have to talk faster.
No, it doesn't, but go right ahead.
Tobacco use has dropped dramatically since the Smoke-Free Act became law. Now, there's still an exemption, though, for casino floors. As governor, would you sign a bill dropping the exemption for those casino floors?
Mr. Vanderplots.
Yes. But I'll take it the other 58 seconds on this. I think this is the height of government arrogance. To say we're going to pass smoke-free in all the private establishments around the state. But by the way, we're going to exempt our own casinos on this deal. So I think it's a fairness issue. Matter of fact, One of my first fundraisers last summer, I had an 8th grader ask me that question, saying, Mr. Vanderplatz, when you get elected governor, will you make casinos smoke-free as well? And the reason is they saw it as a fairness issue. But I also think this is a private property issue. And so therefore, I think if we're not going to make it equitable across the board, including casinos, then we need to allow it to be a private property issue. And again, to let the marketplace determine, you know, where do I eat? Do I want to eat in a smoke-free environment, or do I want to eat in an environment that allows smoke? Darla and I would choose every time to eat in a smoke-free environment. I happen to like that. But this is a fairness and an equity issue, so I would make the casino smoke-free as well.
Mr. Roberts.
That was one of the most significant flaws in that legislation that was passed. And I served in the Iowa House at the time that bill was debated when it was passed. One of the reasons why I voted no on that legislation, and I'm someone who does not smoke, does not advocate people smoke, was because it was the height of hypocrisy for those who were proponents of that legislation to say that in the private sector, private businesses, we think this is in your best interest, and by the way, we don't think you're going to lose out on business at all. You'll still be profitable. But when it came to state government, all of a sudden we couldn't allow the gaming floors in our casinos to be smoke-free because, well, we might jeopardize revenue to the state of Iowa. You can't have it both ways. If it was good for the private sector, it should have been good for state government, I would sign that legislation, and I would also make the gaming floors exempt.
Mr. Branstad.
The answer is yes, I would sign legislation so that the casinos would also be covered by the smoke-free law. I would also point out my wife's probably the original militant non-smoker. We eliminated smoking in our house back in the 70s. We eliminated it the first day I became governor in 1983 in both the governor's office in Terrace Hill. I moved the ashtrays out of there. We eventually eliminated the sale of cigarettes in the Capitol and other places, and I would have signed that law long ago if the legislature had approved it, but we had smokers in control of the legislature for too long, and I just feel that we ought to extend it across the board, and we ought not be exempting it. It's too dangerous. It causes too many health problems, and I think it's been a good thing that we have that law in Iowa. I just wish that when they tax cigarettes, they would use it to reduce other taxes instead of spent the money as the Democrats did in control of the legislature.
Candidates, one final question, and looking at the time, probably only have about 30 seconds for a final answer on this. I know, I'm sorry, but Janine?
Governor Culver recently asked an independent third party to review an 18% rate hike proposed by Wellmark Blue Cross and Blue Shield. The rate hike was approved and I think goes into effect today. Is there a role that government should play in limiting premium increases by Iowa insurance companies? And Mr. Roberts, we begin with you.
30 seconds, it's the lightning round, I guess. Yes. The governor appoints people to positions with boards, commissions, and in this case, departments or agencies. We have an insurance commissioner. There are people who are charged with responsibilities to look at issues like that. I think it's more appropriate to simply allow the people you've put in positions of authority to do their job. They're professionals. They're supposed to understand the issues and know how to make the right decisions on behalf of state government and the executive branch. And I think it would be far better just to let the insurance commissioner be the director of that.
Mr. Branstad?
The insurance commissioner has that responsibility. The governor should not be second guessing his appointee, the insurance commissioner. If he's not satisfied with the person he's got, then he should have somebody that he is satisfied with and not be second guessing that person and going to additional taxpayers' expense to do another review when it's already been done by the staff and the insurance commissioner.
Mr. Vanderplatz.
Here's an area where I agree both with Representative Roberts and former Governor Branstad, so don't let me take a lot of time on that. But I think the real issue here is driving down healthcare costs. If we're going to drive down healthcare costs, it's going to come to personal responsibility, incentives like health savings accounts, medical savings accounts. I believe true medical liability reform, stop suing the pants off our medical community, increase access to pools of risk, and increase insurance providers' coverage here in the state of Iowa, because competition will drive down costs. I believe Iowa should be a leader in private delivery of health care, not the federal government takeover of health care.
That concludes our question and answer time with our media panel, and now each of the candidates will have a 90-second closing remark to end our debate today. We first of all start with Bob Vanderplatz.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, the moderators and the Iowa Broadcasters Association and Iowa Public Television, as well as my peers in this race. I think it's clear today that Iowa needs new leadership. If you ask those who are closest to me, my family, my friends, students, athletes, peers who have worked with me or served with me, or people who have employed me, they would say I'm positive and I'm optimistic. I believe Iowa needs a positive and optimistic leader today. But they would also tell you that I'm very, very persistent. I think even my two peers in this race would tell you I'm a very, very persistent candidate. But I believe Iowa needs a persistent governor today. But I'm also a leader who is willing to confront the brutal facts and to be honest with the people of Iowa as we move this state forward. That's why I have an education plan to return Iowa to prominence in education, not to go back to the past where we grew bureaucracy at the expense of the classroom, but to actually simplify the system where we can restore Iowa to the prominence based on parental rights and control, not government control. Also, we rolled out an economic development plan. We need a positive, optimistic, and persistent leader here as well, so we can have a competitive tax structure, so we can have a friendly regulatory structure, and a governor who will market this state as a right-to-work state. I also believe it's time we have a CEO from the private sector, not the public sector. It's one that produces more but with less. I want to grow the private sector, not the public sector. I thank you for being here today. I'd ask that you join our team, bobvp.com.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderplots. Rod Roberts.
I would like to thank the Iowa Broadcast News Association, Iowa Public Television, Mediacom, and the journalists who are with us today for the outstanding job they've done and the opportunity to speak to Iowans. Iowans are going to bring about change in 2010. Chet Culver has failed this state, and the people of Iowa want a new governor. They want conservative leadership. They want a conservative governor who is grounded in Iowa common sense and traditional Iowa values, values that I have held to throughout my life. I've served 10 years in the Iowa House, 8 of those years in a leadership role, and currently serve as senior member of the House Republican leadership team. I understand the challenges that we're confronting. And Chet Culver knows that in the general election campaign, I can not only unite Republicans, but I can cast a compelling conservative message to all Iowans that will attract independents and Democrats alike. I can win in November. I would encourage you to find out more about me by visiting my campaign website, robertsforgov.com. Iowa is at a crossroads, and it's time for new leadership. I would respectfully ask for your support and for your vote in the June 8th Republican primary election. It's time for change, time for conservative leadership. I'm prepared to lead. I can win in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Branstad.
I too want to thank the Iowa Broadcast News Association, the panelists, and Iowa Public Television for this opportunity. Iowans are genuinely fearful and concerned about Governor Culver's reckless and irresponsible actions, and yet Iowans are hopeful with the right leadership we can see an economic comeback in this state. And I think Iowans know that I have the experience and the ability to lead that comeback in Iowa. I love this state. I gave up a good job that I loved because I want to lead this state, and I want to see us have an unprecedented time of growth and opportunity for all of our citizens. I know, given the opportunity, Iowans will exceed expectations. That's why I've set ambitious goals. 200,000 new jobs in the next 5 years, raising family incomes by 25%, reducing the size and cost of government by at least 15%, and making our education system best in America again. I know we can do it, working together. I love this state, and I appreciate this opportunity to visit directly with the people of Iowa. I would ask you to go to my website, www.governorbranstad2010.com, and join our effort, and I would appreciate and sincerely ask for your vote in the primary election on June 8th, 2010. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Branstad, and that does conclude our 2010 GOP gubernatorial debate. I wish to once again thank our candidates for agreeing to be with us today. Terry Branstad, Bob Vanderplots, and Rod Roberts. We appreciate you agreeing to be with us here today in Cedar Rapids. Also want to thank the members of our media panel that joined us today as well. Paul Yeager from Iowa Public Television, Janine Beck from Iowa Public Radio, and Todd Dorman here from the Gazette here in Cedar Rapids. We also wish to thank the staff and management here at the Cedar Rapids Marriott for helping us and providing the facility to host our debate today. On behalf of the membership of the Iowa Broadcast News Association, I'm Bob Fisher. Thank you very much for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.